Okay, welcome to week 5, our intro to Photoshop, our first chance to get into the actual Adobe software, which I'm pretty excited about. And I know that some of you have some Photoshop experience and some of you have zero Photoshop experience, and it doesn't matter because we're going to just kind of do this very specific Photoshop 101, tackling the things that are important and what you should know. And it's eye-opening and you learn something every time, no matter what. Photoshop has changed a lot since its inception back in, I forget what it was, the 90s, the early 90s, late 80s. It was the go-to for just modifying photos and, working with photos and making them look more beautiful or completely changing them and doing all kinds of crazy stuff. And it's become a tool that you can use to actually create art from nothing, which is pretty cool. And I don't know if any of you have an iPad or a drawing tablet, but more and more Photoshop it's still working with its primary function of photos and making photos beautiful, but it is also keeping up with some of the applications like Procreate, where you can actually create art in Photoshop, which is very, very cool. And it has an iPad, kind of an app version, a Photoshop Lite version, and there are a whole bunch of Adobe apps. If you ever have the chance to work on an iPad or download any of the apps that are available within the Adobe suite, there are a bunch that work exclusively on a mobile device that are really cool, where you can like take a picture of a pattern and then make like a wallpaper out of it, take a picture of this and turn it into vector art, and loads and loads of stuff. Take a picture and create a color palette. So it's lots of fun, and the coolest thing about it is when you sign in with your Adobe ID, it becomes available on all of the devices that you are working on. So if you do this on your phone or on your iPad and then log into your computer to work on it, to work on our class stuff, you should see the work that you started if you add it to a library. And that's why that's one of our assignments this week. But I am going to give you a tour of Photoshop this week, just of the interface and the workspace, and make sure everybody is on the same page with how you set up your workspace so that some of the instructions make sense when you're working through the tutorials. And then I will open it up for questions. I'll give you a demo of this week's tutorials. And then I had a couple of things that last week I didn't get to. And I know we had that kind of whirlwind talking about so many different things last week, and it was a lot of fun, and we ran out of time. But there was 2 things that I wanted to, before I give you the tour, to show you, to tell you about, so that you had the opportunity to kind of add these to your design practice. These are not assignments, they're not requirements, but they're cool things, and they're tools and practices that I use, and I started using them 30 years ago when I first started in design. One of my first studios that I worked at and interned at, she was like, oh, you should get one of these. And I got it, and I still have my original one. So these you can get on Amazon. You can get them at Blick. I don't know if you can see this one. This one is the same as the other. It's just, let me find something to put it against. It's just clear, which is nice because when you overlay it, it will have a clear background so you can measure whatever it is you're looking at. And these are called, I think I have a white piece of paper. Here you go. So now you can see it. They're rulers, but they are also type gauges and point gauges. So you can use these to measure the size of type in an existing design or something you're looking at. And it also goes, they have the point sizes for leading or for lines. It has a ruler. It has a point gauge here for measuring fonts. And this is mostly for print, granted, because you can't hold it up to your screen and get any kind of accuracy. But this is something that I've used my whole design career. And it's a handy tool We use them in the classroom, and when you will actually get a chance, if you do get one, to use one in our final, it's not a final, but it's one of our last projects in InDesign. So I wanted to give you enough of a chance to kind of see what it is and look at it, and they're cheap. I mean, they're not an expensive tool at all. So if you plan to kind of pursue design at all, it's something I recommend. So I just wanted to kind of mention that. Did you guys all get a fairly good look at it? You feel good about that? Okay, so type gauge is, I think, how I would Google it. That's what I think they're called. And then the other thing is something that I started with my advanced Illustrator class, but it's actually something that I think you guys would like. And it's something that's also a great practice. It's something that I do regardless, and I can't stop doing it. I'm addicted to it. So I end up with a ton of these notebooks. So this is just kind of like a soft moleskin journal, and I put stickers on it. This is a Toya portfolio, which they have at the art stores, or you can get them on Amazon, and it has the pages you can fill. I collect printed samples of things that I like, or this is a menu from a ramen place. This is a poster that I got when my son was visiting design schools. I asked him if I could have it. This is a Starbucks coffee menu that I thought was well designed. And I like to have all of these things kind of in one place. That this is a super awesome, another art school printed brochure. PMS colors. They did not print this with CMYK. Each of the colors you see here is its own ink. And it's a neon ink, and it's a fantastic art piece. Just weird, all kinds of weird stuff. And so I wanted to encourage you, this is a little coffee sleeve with a gold foil stamp from Mr. Holmes Bakery in San Francisco. Some Hello Kitty origami paper. The reason why I liked this was because they printed on acetate, which is clear, which is a totally different printing technique than printing on paper, because acetate is plastic and they have to use a special kind of ink that'll stick to the plastic. So I just wanted to show you guys this and encourage you to get, if you don't already, some sort of notebook where you can stick things into it, double stick acid, whatever that acid archival, double stick tape, or paper clip things into it as you're just like around. And I know we're not around nearly as much as we used to be with quarantine and businesses being closed. But as things start to open up and you have the opportunity, I mean, this is like just a paper bag that they rubber stamped, but I loved the illustration, so I saved it. And they're just kind of, I just call them a design inspiration notebook. I do it with my advanced Illustrator, and it's something they start at the beginning of term, and then about halfway through we would walk around the room and look at everybody else's, and it was like the most fun that we had in class. And then at the end of term we do it again and kind of show everybody not only what they've collected but maybe what they've learned. In the notebook version I usually will jot down black paper, gold foil print, or acetate, with a white soy ink, or just kind of any sort of print technique that I noticed from the project. So those were two things we didn't get to last week that I wanted to show you guys that are just general design tools / practices that I thought that you guys would benefit from. So any questions about either of those things before we get to our Photoshop tour?
Where did you get that little portfolio binder with the clear sleeves?
This one I got at, I actually just got it at an art store. We were in LA at the time. It was a warehouse one. I got this one on clearance. They have this brand on Amazon, and they also have it at Blick, I believe, and if not Blick, for sure at University Art downtown. These, but their selection will be limited. So I would look online first. It's Itoya. Itoya art portfolio. And this is an 8x10, which is good and bad. Like an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper won't fit into it. Blick has a version of this that the school would get for us sometimes. And they have an 8.5 by 11 or a 9 by 12 version with 8.5 by 11 sleeves. So I know Blick has a version. I've always kind of been partial to this brand, but it's basically exactly the same as the Blick version with the sheets on the inside. And it's nice because then you can just slide stuff in without attaching it to the page, but you can't make notes on the things as easily as you can with the notebook version. But there's all kinds of creative solutions to that. You could, write it on a little Post-it or any sort of little slip of paper to attach in there. And then I get totally hung up on like what stickers I'm going to put on it too. So I end up, decorating the outside of it, and I've got several of these, and I just love everything that I put in them are things that I've wanted to save. So yeah. Any other questions? All right, well, I'm going to share my screen and get to our tour of Photoshop so that I can just go over everything just really briefly. The Photoshop lecture, Photoshop, let's see what it's called, Adobe Photoshop Overview, that page in our module has all of this information. And part 4 of that Photoshop overview, there are several videos. If you guys don't already follow different people on YouTube, I would encourage you to do so, and to follow Adobe, to follow Terry White. He is now a certified Adobe instructor, and he does a lot of their tutorials. But I started watching his stuff a while back, and he's the Photoshop genius, and he just makes it really simple, and he gets straight to it, and he gives great examples. So the videos that I have for you to watch in our in the lecture for this week are his videos. I like him a lot more than I like some of the other Adobe instructors. There's a couple, I try to pick tutorials where I'm partial to the person giving the tutorial, if I'm using a third-party one, because I don't want you guys to have to listen to anyone that I don't already like trust or if I feel like they're a dork, I just can't, it's hard for me to get into it. So I try to, it's just terrible to say, but I try to make sure it's going to be something that you can listen to and that's going to be interesting. And Terry White is awesome. So I have my school YouTube account, and I follow a whole bunch of different Adobe pages as well as, or channels, as well as Terry White's channel and a few other cool people that I like, but there's a lot of cool stuff on there. Anyways, I'm going to share my screen and we're going to get to Photoshop. Let's see here. We're going to do Photoshop. Okay, so my Photoshop from the get-go is going to probably look a little bit different than the first time you guys open Photoshop, and that is because I'm using it on a daily basis. So some of the kind of default things that you would normally get the first time you use Photoshop are already been chosen for me. So you can see this is called the home screen, and this is what's going to open up every time you open Photoshop, so that you can create a new document here on the left, or you can open an existing document. You can jump to your cloud documents, which are all the things that you're storing in your Adobe Creative Cloud. You can jump to your Lightroom photos if you're working with a whole bunch of photos and you've got kind of a library of photos. But everything that it's showing are things that I've been working on. So it's already kind of giving you something where yours may just be blank here and not show any sort of recent work. One of the very cool things that all of the Adobe applications do right away is to give you some suggestions of a tour of tutorials, or just kind of jumping to their website where their whole list of tutorials are located, which I'm going to show you in a minute. So from the home screen, just so that we can get into a workspace, I'm going to hit Create New, and this is going to open up the Create New window, which every time you start a new Photoshop document, you're going to want to get to this window. It's right off the bat going to show you recents, and it's if you've created documents in the past, it's showing me recents because I've been working in Photoshop. But there's also all of these other presets, which are very, very handy. These are photography related presets. There are presets if you are going to be printing your final project. There's art and illustration presets if you're going to be designing and creating in Photoshop. There's web presets if you're going to be designing for the web, mobile for mobile, and then film and video if you're going to be doing any sort of animation work. And these are all presets that are by resolution and also by dimension. So I have us mostly sticking within print. And for today, I'm just going to open up a standard 8.5 by 11 letter size workspace. And over on the right here, it gives you all of the details of what you're doing. You can change your unit of measurement. If you're working in the web, you may want to work in pixels, and it automatically changes for you if you use a preset. While when you're working in print, you most likely want to work in inches. It also has your resolution as a preset. 300 for print. And anyone remember what web is? Anything for the screen? 72 DPI. So it'll automatically change to 72 in the web presets. And it should be the same for mobile and film and video because those are all on the screen. So print and photo, meanwhile, are going to stay at 300 DPI because that's the higher resolution that you need if you want any kind of clarity and sharpness on the images that you're printing. So maybe I'll actually do a photo and go with the default Photoshop size, which is a 7 by 5 inch wide wide document, and I'm just going to hit create, which is the bottom right. You can also just hit return or enter on your keyboard and it will create that file for you. So this, what we're looking at right now, is called your workspace. Anytime that you hear workspace in Adobe, it's talking about the entire thing. And until you change it, which you're 100% allowed to do, your toolbar is going to be on the left, your panels are going to be on the right, and your control bar is going to be across the top. Now, all of that can be modified by you, but that's the default. Every Adobe application that you open that we work on in this class, Photoshop, Illustrator, and InDesign, is going to have that same configuration where your panels are on the right, your tools are on the left, and then your control bar is across the top. All of these can be modified, like I said, and for our purposes, so up in the top of your workspace, it has this little tiny arrow to drop down, and that's where the presets of your workspace live. I know I mentioned in the tutorial that for our purposes, the Essentials workspace is what is best to be used. So if you keep a careful eye on my workspace, you'll see it change when I select Essentials, because right now I have it set to a custom Nikki workspace. So I'm going to just hit Essentials so it will look at like what you guys should see. And then, did anything change? Let's see here. Let's go to photography. Okay, so did you see a change? Pretty much. I chose photography. So now I'm going to go back to Essentials, and this is what it should do. So it gives you a selection of panels, a selection of tools. It puts your control bar at the top, because these are the things that are most commonly used when you're working with the basics. And for our class, we're not really going to get out of the basics. For the tutorials that you watch, both with Terry and the Adobe tutorials, and with any demo that I give you, you won't need more than what you see in the Essentials workspace. Now, if you were to, pull your toolbar off and move it, and maybe you can edit the toolbar. Maybe like we want to, I don't know, get rid of something or move something around somehow and just change it up, or we have opened some of the panels and then we just closed them on accident instead of collapsing them. because they can very easily be undocked from the right or left. And then instead of collapsing it, you accidentally close them and you lose some of those. All you have to do is go back and reset the workspace, and everything should jump back to where it was, which is really nice. So that said, does that make sense to everybody? Because it's important, and you will lose things and you won't be able to find them. And I'm going to show you, besides the workspace, the other trick. So everything over here is called a panel. Under Window, in your Photoshop menu at the top, there's a lovely alphabetical, for once, list of all the panels that are available. So if there's a panel that a tutorial is asking you for or instructing you to go look at and you can't find it, just go to Window and select that panel, and it will open it up. And sometimes if it's not one that's already docked, let's find one that's not already docked. How about nope, channels is there. How about brushes? If we're creating a brand new thing and we open brushes, now brushes is floating, and it's a floating panel, and it's not attached or docked to our nicely organized panels on the right. And all you have to do is just grab it by the top, and once you see the blue light of dragging it to where you want it and let go, then it docks it. And that's the same thing that happens if you accidentally undock the toolbar, or think maybe you want to move it and then you want to move it back. You just drag it to where it goes and wait for that blue light, and it will redock. The other little trick for all of the Adobe applications is finding a tool. Photoshop is really cool because when you hover over, and I think they all do this now, when you hover over a tool, it tells you what it is. The letter that's in parentheses is the key command. So as you start to memorize, or as you start to work in Photoshop, it is kind of nice to memorize those key commands, because then if you don't remember what the tool looks like by the icon, you can remember, okay, the brush tool starts with a B. If I just hit B on my keyboard, it's going to take me to the brush tool. Eyedropper, that probably starts with I. Yep, it jumps to the eyedropper tool. And Photoshop will kind of give you a hint. Just by hovering over the tool, it'll tell you what it is and what the key command is. The other trick with the toolbar is, if you can see in the bottom right of some of the tools, it has a little triangle, which is a little drop down arrow. And that means there's other tools hidden underneath it. They stack them by type of tool. And all you have to do is click and hold, and it will show you what the other tools are underneath. Because sometimes we might be talking about, the tool, like the patch tool, which is 3 tools down underneath the healing brush tool, or a different eyedropper tool, or a different text tool. So if you can't find the tool you're looking for, you don't know what the key command is, or you hit eyedropper and it takes you to the basic eyedropper, but really what you want is one of the other eyedropper tools, which there are 6, and the key command is I for all of them. Just remember that drop down, because that's where it's hiding. So, and that's going to be the same in all the Adobe applications. They don't have room for 100 tools where you'd be able to recognize the icon. So they kind of group them, which is handy. And as far as editing your toolbar, which is something that as you work in Photoshop, if you want to customize your workspace, you can have at it. You hit the little drop down and then select Edit Toolbar, and it's going to come up with your customized toolbar window, where you can drag and drop whatever you want onto your toolbar. You can save that, once you're totally done, save it as, Kimberly's toolbar, and then you've got your own toolbar, and you can always reset back to Essentials, and it'll reset it to how you need it, but you'll have yours saved and you can load it when you get back to it. That said, you can also save your workspace, which is what I did. Once you have everything set up the way you want, you just select New Workspace, and it will prompt you to enter the name for that workspace, and then you can save all your customizations there as well. So that's kind of a tour of the geography of Photoshop. Does anyone have questions about that so far? It's a lot of info, but it's once you kind of get familiar with it, it's going to be the same over and over again. our control bar, which I want to show you guys, but I don't know how to move this screen. Okay, let me get this out of the way. Okay, so this is true for Photoshop and not for Illustrator. So know that there's a difference. The control bar across the top of Photoshop will change depending on what tool you have selected. And what the control bar does is gives you extra options for that tool. It gives you options for how the tool works, what the tool does. So for instance, let's take brush, because brush is kind of something that we can all visualize. So right now, if you can see, I've got a 40 pixel, and I'm just going to click on this drop down where it says 40. I have a 40 pixel brush. The edge is 100% hard, which means that there's no sort of feathering out to the edge of it. I've chosen just a standard general brush that was given to us by Photoshop, part of the default Photoshop library. It's really interesting to see all of the different things that are available, and we'll get to that a little bit later in Photoshop. But I've selected brush, and I can go in and I can make all kinds of changes to how that tool works. So if I just, let me just set it back to what it was at and draw a line so you guys can see it. So my default 40 pixel, 100% hard brush, or if I decide to change it, make it bigger and softer and draw a line, you can see how that changes the brush. And the way you change the brush, the way you change any of your tools, is in the control bar across the top. In Illustrator, once we get to it, the control bar changes depending on what object you've selected on your artboard rather than what tool you're using. So if for some reason a tool that you're using is not working the way you expect it to, it's probably because of something going on in the control bar. So make sure you check and look and see, you know, what's going on. Like if you were expecting to come in and draw like a nice solid line, and you come in and it's like, it's fuzzy. Why is it fuzzy? I can't figure out why it's fuzzy. Well, it's, you can control that in your control bar. So always look there first for the answer to why your tool isn't working the way it should be, or isn't quite matching up to what it says in the tutorial instructions. So that's the control bar, super handy, all kinds of extras for utilizing your tools. So that said, the only other thing of interest probably in your workspace is your zooming in options down at the bottom left. You can always zoom in, and I touch on this in the lecture, but you can always zoom in with Command or Control and Spacebar, and just dragging your mouse to the left or to the right to zoom in. You can actually use the zoom tool, which will automatically be on plus if you drag to the right, and zooming out if you drag to the left. This is interesting down here, this little percentage at the very bottom left of your workspace, because it's showing you what percentage you're zoomed into. And Photoshop goes up to 12,000 so that you can zoom in and see every little pixel that you're working with. And it also tells you the size of your document and the resolution of your document. So it's informational down there, and it's handy. So just know that that's there, because it's a quick way to see what your file is without having to go into your menu and trying to look up stuff about your document. So anyone have questions just in general about the tour of Photoshop before I talk about the libraries and then kind of the layers tutorial? All good?
Yeah, it's probably a pretty basic question. I'm brand new to Photoshop, never used it before. So changing the color, I imagine it's just on that same toolbar on the left.
That's a really good question. So in Photoshop, the little swatches here at the bottom of your toolbar are called your background and your foreground colors, excuse me. So by default, it's set to black as your foreground color and white as your background color. X on your keyboard will swap it. And also this little arrow here will swap them. But if you double click on them, you get your color picker, which allows you to change the color of your foreground or background color. You can sample something from a photo. If you have a photo open, you can, I can actually just do that. Let's do that. Open one of our Photoshop 101 photos. How about this one? You can double click. Okay, so you can sample, and I always try to zoom in because even though you think you're sampling a color, sometimes it's just close. But you can sample directly from the photo in this way in your little color picker. And once I hit OK, it'll change the foreground color in my toolbar. Or you can use the slider. You can type in the CMYK build. You can access a color library. And if you have a PMS book, you can reference the PMS swatch to find the color. Once I hit OK, it changes my foreground color. So then when you're using your brush or when you're typing or whatever you're doing, let me just make my brush much, much bigger. You are doing it in that color. And I'm going to add a layer so I'm not painting directly onto my photo. This is a future kind of thing, but I'm just going to kind of show you as I'm going to illustrate the point. So now I'm painting with my super hard 400 pixel brush in that color that we chose, that we picked right out of the photo. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. Anyone else have questions? General Photoshop questions. Another thing about the workspace, I don't know if you guys can see across the top, I now have 2 tabs open. I have our kind of working tab that we were using as a generic tour for Photoshop. And then I've also have the photo that I opened from the library of image open. And the more tabs, files you have open, the more tabs that you'll have across the top of your workspace. Keep in mind, it's going to tax your RAM, your random access memory. I'm going to move you guys down here because I like to look at you when I'm talking and I'm looking at the other screen and I feel like I'm rolling my eyes. But it's going to tax your RAM the more files that you have open. So only have open what you need because otherwise it's going to slow everything way down. And Photoshop is already a monster. So your processor is already going to be working extra hard to show you what Photoshop can do. So you want to only have open what you need. But if you end up with more files open than is space across the top of your bar, it will show them under window at the bottom. It'll give you a list of all of the files you have open so that if you need to access a tab that's going way off to the right, you can access it that way. So that's just kind of another general, and all the Adobe software works the same way. And they're all monsters and they will all tax your RAM. So you only want to have open what you need. No matter how new my computer, how fast my processor, how many hard drives, how much RAM that I've had, and I always max it out every time I buy a new machine. Having all of my Adobe software open all at the same time has always slowed things down. So that's another thing. If you're having trouble and things seem to be working slowly, shut some of your applications and that should help things to work a little bit more quickly. So just a little tip. Any other questions? Okay,
how did you open that tab? Because I feel like that was pretty...
The extra tab? So all I did, there's a couple different ways to open files in Photoshop. I'm in Photoshop, I can go under File and then Open, and it's going to show me the Finder window, or in, I forget what it's called on a Windows-based machine. And you can navigate to where you think a photo would be, the folder that you have it in. For me, it would be Desktop, Sierra College, and then you guys, and find the photo and open it. Another way to do it would be to go back to their home menu. Anytime you want to go back to that home screen that first opens, top left, there's a little house. Click home and you can open it from there. If it's a recent file, it'll show up in your recents. Otherwise, you would click open and it would take you to that same Finder window. The way I opened this was through the library. which is one of your assignments this week, is to create a library in Photoshop. The cool thing about libraries, let me just give you a quick spiel on that. Once you're logged in with your Adobe ID and you create a library, it will be available to you wherever you log in to look at your Adobe account or to work on a different machine. If I go to work and log in with my Adobe ID to my work computer, my libraries, and open up Photoshop, my libraries will be there. And what I did to open this file and that opened a second tab was just to double click on the photo in my library and it opened it up. So I have a whole bunch of libraries just from all the different classes, different projects. Some of them have fonts and paragraph styles in them. Some of them have photos in them. Some of them have color swatches in them. And it's just really a great way to organize your work. And here's my design elements and principles library. I'm sure you guys recognize some of the things in this library. But just, yeah, you have access to that library through your panels, and then you can just double click on it and it will open up the image, which opens up that next tab. And then you can just close the tab by clicking on the X. You can go under File and hit Close, or you can do Command W. Speaking of which, under the File menu, it will give you the key command for any of the things in the menu off to the right. So this little squiggle is Command or Control. This is Option or Alt. The up arrow is Shift. So that kind of deciphers the key commands. And you start to memorize them after a while. And unfortunately, they are not always the same in all of the Adobe applications, but for the most part, they are pretty close to the same. So any other questions?
How did you create new layers?
Okay, so let me finish touching on libraries really quick, because you guys have a layers tutorial, and that way I can jump to that and we can talk about layers while we talk about the layers tutorial. So the library tutorial you guys have for this week, it's just a step-by-step, and you're just going to be adding photos that I provided you, stock photos, to a new library and title that library Photoshop 101. You'll end up with something similar to this. I've given you guys new photos. These are a little bit older photos that I've had in the past, but you'll have a new selection of photos, and then you just take a screen grab of that photo library and upload that to Canvas for this assignment. Feel free, by all means, to create other libraries if you want to add photos of your own. Riley, you could have, your Harry Potter contest photos in a library separate from your schoolwork stuff, and then you would have access to it. You don't have to go look for the photos on your hard drive or wherever they are. They're going to be there available to you in Photoshop, in InDesign, and in Illustrator, and at whatever other, in XD or any other application that you're using that utilizes libraries. That library will be available to you. So it's very handy. It's a tiny bit of extra work. It goes under file management, and if you're billing your time as a graphic designer, that's part of the work. That's part of the job, is managing that artwork. So I recommend that you begin that practice, and that's why that tutorial is part of this week's work. So that said, you guys did the copyright stuff last week, and should all be kind of aware by now that if you're going to use a photo, you've got to pay for it. It has to be yours. You have to have permission, or it has to be up for just public use and not regulated by any sort of license. So I meant to say that last week, but again, when you're building your libraries, the photos that I've given you guys are just for this class. They're I can't remember what we use, what I have for you guys this year, but they're photos that I bought and I've used in the past, or they're photos that I've taken, and I can't 100% remember, but just stick to the rules. And if there's any doubt at all, you can ask, or you can don't use it and find something that you're sure about. That's generally what I try to do. I end up using a lot of stock photography in work for clients, and every once in a while they will find a photo that they found on Google through a Google search, and I'll have to ask them where they got it and if we have permission to use it before we go ahead and put it into their design and get it printed and get it out there, because it's something that is regulated, and especially with social media, everybody can see everything, and you want to always make sure you're being respectful of the law and also of other artists' work. So that said, I'm going to jump over to layers. Oops, I'm going to put you guys up here, and I'm going to open a layers tutorial so that we can really quickly talk about layers before I cut you loose for the week. So let's see here. This week, okay, so has anyone started the layers tutorial? Hannah? No? Yes? Ismar, you had a question about it, right?
Yeah.
Text.
Yeah, it was just a text because I'm pretty much done with the whole assignment.
Okay, good. And this is it, right? The beach, it's this layers tutorial with the beaches and the...
Yeah.
Okay. So this tutorial is going to give you a chance to work with layers. Now, layers in Photoshop are basically the equivalent of laying, almost like in the old days it was acetate, where, remember the Hello Kitty origami paper I showed you guys, how it's printed on a clear paper? Well, back in the day, that's how they used to do it. They used to layer colors on top of each other in order to make your final composition. Working with layers in Photoshop gives you the opportunity to save the original photo, to make changes and modify, edit, do whatever you want to photos without losing any of your original material. We are going to, and Terry White always stresses, non-destructive photo editing. You always want to be able to go back to your original photo. You never want to lose that. You never want to erase pixels or destroy pixels entirely. I know there are teachers that say do not use the erase tool. If you use the erase tool, that's it. You get an F on the project. I'm not going to give you an F on the project, but don't use the erase tool. There's no reason to destroy pixels when we have layers, because you never know when a client's going to want you to go back to the original, when you're going to decide, oh, I really needed that little bit of that photo, and now it's gone forever, or anything, or you lose the original photo somehow, or it becomes corrupted and you need to go pull the original photo layer out of the composition that you're working on. This is an original photo right here. It's the one that you're starting with before you add other photos to it, and you want to make sure that you save it. So the layers panel is one that comes up in your essentials. If it doesn't, you just open it under window and layers and add it to your workspace, or your what are these called, your panels. And in order to add layers, you can hover over any of the icons and it's going to tell you what to do. You can add a layer just by at the very bottom of the layer panel. There's a create new layer button. There's also what's called a hamburger menu. It's these three little lines that look like two buns and a hamburger at the top right of all of your panels. When you click on that, it gives you a new layer option. And it also gives you the key command for what a new layer it is. Shift, Command or Control, is that right? Control on Windows, right? And then N, or let's see here. To duplicate your layer, which is what you're going to want to do if you're ever editing a layer completely, is Command J. That's the one I use most often. I've got my original photo, this background image of the beach huts, and I want to start, changing it, making it bigger, cropping it. So I'll duplicate it, which is, you can also find it under the hamburger menu, but it's Command J, which is just like somehow been beaten into me, so I use it all the time. And that duplicates that layer. The more layers you have, the did you guys watch the video of my web guy, Tariq, that I had in the module this week? If not, I'm going to show you because you should see his layers. You can layer, you can subset layers, you can group your layers, you can add blank layers and then paint directly over your picture without damaging your original picture. Your assignment this week is going to be working with these photos to create a composition where you have the beach huts, and then you have beach balls on different layers, and you have the Volkswagen bus on different layers. And that way you can move them all around and put them where you like them. They're not bound to each other, and it gives you a chance to modify and create and enhance the original as you're making a composition. Let me just, for fun, show you guys. Let me stop the screen share for real quick, and I'll show you guys Tariq's crazy. So he's my web guy. I'm print, he's web, and we work together. We've been working together for over 10 years. He did this YouTube video and sent it to me for fun one day. I'm trying to work, and Tariq sends me this thing of him photoshopping himself so that, and this was a few years ago, but the end result is that it kind of looks like what you would get if you were doing, if you were doing a, I'm so terrible at this, Snapchat, but he did it all in Photoshop. Can you guys see my YouTube window right now? Okay, so keep an eye on the bottom right here. That's his layers panel. And you can see he doesn't destroy pixels. He masks, he paints, he applies effects to this photo of himself. I have no idea why he did this other than just to make me laugh and send it over. But keep an eye on the layers panel because it's amazing how much just to create this kind of simple little, what, you know, Snapchat does it for you basically now. All of those layers. He copies his layers, copies pictures of himself, modifies those pictures so he never loses the original. He paints, he adds color, texture. The black that you see kind of to the right of some of the layer items are called masks, and we're going to work with masks. Was it over already? We're going to work with masks. I want to pause it at the end. We're going to work with masks on your Photoshop project. So you're gonna get a chance to do that. But yeah, it's totally silly. He's a nut, but that is, you know, you can have 100 layers and it's gonna be awesome, and you're going to be able to create compositions that you're not losing your original. It's best to organize them, to use the folders, to make sure you name your layers, which is part of this week's tutorial. If you just double click in your layers panel on the generic default name of the layer, you're able to change the name of it really easily. That way you can find it. And once you have, like Tariq did, a whole bunch of layers, it's nice to have a label to it so you can jump to it and find it, and instead of them all just being called layer 1 through 100. Another thing of note in Photoshop, when you're adding layers, it's going to add them in reverse chronological order. So the earliest layers are on the bottom, and then the newest layers are at the top, and they're being numbered kind of as you go. If I wanted to group, you can select a layer by clicking on it, and then if you hold down Command or Control, you can select other layers and then lock them together so that when you move whatever is on those layers, they move as a group. You can also create a group by just clicking on the folder, and it's going to put those 3 layers into a folder together. When you click on the drop down, there they are. So a little bit of interfile organization. This is organizing your layers, which is very important for your file management, and just it's a really good design practice. So I'm going to stop sharing. I'm going to take questions if you have any. Before, if you don't have any, you're free to leave, but let me go ahead and screen grab my participants list so I can make sure you guys all get credit for being here. And then I will take questions of anyone who has questions.